what is that underneath? Is it that feeling of not being good enough? Is it that imposter syndrome? Is it betrayal? Is it your pride? Is it your sense of self that was deeply rooted in this life that you had established and this future that you had in mind that is now no longer going to be the same? Or do you sit back and you actually just talk for 30, 45 minutes? Because chances are this person just wants to be heard and they haven't been heard or listened to for a long time. Separation when you're going through it is not a one-size-fits-all process. It really, really isn't. So just be mindful of the different resources and educate yourself on who you can actually benefit from engaging with at certain points in that process. I think that's one of the first things, unfortunately, out the window, because again, when you're in that fight or flight situation, it's very, very hard to think objectively about your own best interests. And I don't care how much you love your kids, if you can't think about your own best interests, how are you supposed to look after theirs? So be very mindful of that. Eye rolling, sighing, you hit two of the big ones, definitely, or the interrupting and the defensiveness, going back to maybe emotional issues. And I think something that trips couples up in a relationship can be scorekeeping and really trying to lay blame and saying, well, you did this last week, so I'm going to do this week because you owe me, kind of thing.
Welcome to the Just Separated podcast. Hi, I'm Karen Omand, a thanatologist, grief counselor, divorce strategist, and co-author of the Just Separated workbook. I draw on years of personal and professional experience to guide you through the challenges of your divorce. Together, with our expert guests, we'll equip you with the clarity, resilience, and tools to take charge and move forward with confidence. Follow Just Separated and join us as we explore the many different facets of divorce. Welcome to the Just Separated podcast. I'm your host, Karen Omand, co-founder of the Divorce Workshop. Today we're going to talk about staying calm in chaos, divorce lessons from a cop and mediator. And our expert guest today is Justin Hendriks. Justin founded the FairPlay Mediation with a genuine desire to help others navigate conflict in a less formal setting. One that prioritizes the human desire to be heard and have a say in outcomes that affect them. Having experienced firsthand the stress and co-parenting turmoil typically associated with traditional divorce process, Justin quickly understood the value in finding mutually beneficial solutions while fostering open, respectful communications between parties. Justin is a single father, a combat veteran of the British Army, and a police officer with 17 years of law enforcement experience. Each of these roles have given him intensive experience communicating and problem-solving under circumstances that are as diverse as the individuals involved. Welcome, Justin, to the Just Separated podcast.
Thanks for having me, Karen. Good morning.
So divorce can often feel, for many people that are going through it, they can feel under threat. Their safety, emotionals can be high. Stress is relentless. I've been there. It's overwhelming. It's easy to react to everything, whether that's a text, a legal letter, or conversation with your ex, or even transitional days when you're co-parenting. So you've been in situations where the stakes were just as high, or honestly, probably much higher, as a soldier and as a police officer, and now as well as a mediator. So from your experience, what helps people shift from that reactive state that we've all been in to more of a respond state for more clarity and control?
That's a great question. And you've actually hit on something that I talk about with my clients and even friends or people going through a similar situation all the time. And that is to respond, not react. So whether that's in a military type situation or a law enforcement type scenario, what you try to do is you inoculate yourself, if you like, or you train your mind and your body to respond in a certain way. And really, when you're going through that conflict post-separation, you're feeling triggered by, like you said, a text, even a communication or a co-parenting issue. The response that we have physically is very similar to the fight or flight response that we experience in a life or death situation. What I call lizard brain kicks in that fight or flight, and it's almost like you are actually being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or whatever fear exists in that oldest part of our brain. So preparing yourself for those communications, maybe those child exchanges, or any other conflicts that you might come across that are going to stress you out, and you can get ahead of those and plan for how you want to respond, what you want to say, how you really want to present yourself in that moment. It's like preparing for a sports game and visualizing how you're going to win or respond to those stressors.
So what I hear you saying is that it's a practice, but it's also if we can talk a bit more about being aware of what's in the body. So if you start feeling like anger can be clenching your teeth, your fist may be pumping, or your heartbeat, that's also anxiety too. It's in your stomach, it's in your chest, wherever you feel. I guess I'm saying if you can start feeling it in your body, is that kind of awareness where then you're going, okay, I'm starting to get aroused, I'm starting to get angry, right? Is that what you mean?
It is definitely. And if you can pay attention to those physical symptoms, that's probably the easiest cue that you can give yourself as to when you are facing a stressful situation. You'll notice those things first. And I think a lot of folks don't even realize necessarily that they're experiencing that. So I knew, for instance, I'll use myself as an example. I knew that when I received an email from a lawyer or something like that, I would feel my blood pressure go up instantly and I would feel my stomach tighten. So I didn't realize at the time that that was a physiological response to an emotional state that I was fearing, or it was that fight or flight kicking in. So as soon as you can tune into that and pay attention to your body, then you can say, okay, well, I've practiced for this, I've rehearsed this, here's where I go from here.
And that makes all the difference, right? I'm sure in your past experience being a veteran as well as a police officer now, you're under that constant threat response, right? So are there any tips on how people can learn to use that as a skill? Because as you said, it takes practice. It's a skill. Because I know for myself, when I first got divorced, I want to react all the time. Like I learned the response, but I tell you, it was react. Like, especially if it's a bit more of a high conflict situation, you want to defend, you want to react, you want to justify, so it does take practicing skills. Is there anything that in your wealth of experience that you can tell our listeners a couple of examples of what may help?
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, particularly in, we'll say, a stressful situation, we'll say overseas, I had some operational tour experience. And if you're facing a life or death situation, really just pausing for a moment. And I'm not talking getting frozen or stuck for 5 or 10 seconds. You do have to react under those circumstances, but actually just taking a second to say, what do I have? And how can I engage the rational thinking part of my brain? Because in other situations, particularly where you have more time, capitalize on that. So take that moment, take a day, whatever you need to, if the stakes aren't as high and there's no immediate reaction required, then take the time to think about how you want to respond from a more logical, emotionally grounded place.
Yeah. So the old saying, sleep on it. Would that be recommended?
It couldn't be more true. And what I've had to do for myself is, if I get stressful correspondence, for instance, I will take at least 24 hours, which is tough because I think, and you alluded to it a moment ago, when we react to something, that's really our psyche trying to keep us safe because we're interpreting the stress as life or death, potentially. And if you can take at least 24 hours, which is my rule, at least 24 hours, then that adrenaline dump will have worn off and you're again practicing that mindful response that you've rehearsed, that I was talking about earlier, where you've kind of inoculated or desensitized yourself to that stress. It's very intentional.
Have you ever had to use that in mediation? Like to kind of tell people I think we need to stop now and send them to, you guys need to break. We'll come back tomorrow or a week from now. Has it ever got heated like that?
It definitely has. And you can tell when people have kind of hit that wall. And if you're not getting any headway, you're probably doing more harm than good at that point. So you've got a couple of options as sort of the neutral third party that a mediator is. You can do what we call caucus, which is, put people in separate rooms and say, hey, listen, you know what? I'm going to spend 10 minutes with each of you talking about this stuff. Anything that we talk about in here is going to be confidential. If it's something that we want to share, we'll talk about that first. And that helps people feel a little bit safer so they're not faced with more stimulation than they can potentially handle. And if that's still not going to work and we're not going to be able to get ahead of some of the issues and get a handle on our emotions, it's perfectly acceptable to say, hey, listen, we're not going to make any more progress today. That's not to say that we shouldn't keep working on these issues, but let's come back when we're in a better space to actually have a clear, rational conversation about it, because that's what mediation is all about.
Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, so if you were to mention some behaviors that might um, indicate that your ex, so say the listeners are thinking they're in mediation and they see is there some behaviors that you see that you're, is it the roll of the eyes? Is it uh, like breathing heavy? Like, are there some behaviors that their listeners could look at when they're in mediation going, okay, my partner's getting triggered, my ex-partner's getting triggered, or, you know what I mean? Like, is there any tips strategically like that you could share with our listeners that to watch for some body language? Because we know body language is 80% of our communication. So is there anything that you've seen that you could tell them that, oh, they're sweating? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would actually flip that concept around a little bit and go back to focusing on your own behaviors and how you are presenting, maybe how you're feeling emotionally, because you can't control how the other person is going to react or respond or their behaviors. So try to control your own. And if you can get both parties on the same page with that, then you're doing fine. So be very mindful of that. Eye rolling, sighing, you hit two of the big ones, definitely, or the interrupting and the defensiveness, going back to maybe emotional issues. In the case of a separation, you suddenly want to start talking about things that led to the breakdown of the relationship when it might not be relevant and certainly isn't helping your case, because then you'll both just amp each other up. So focus on what you can control. And that is really the eye contact, clear communication, and focusing on the issues at hand.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Like, we cannot control the other person, but we have to try to stay regulated in a sometimes challenging environment.
Absolutely. And I haven't had to break out the talking stick yet, but I've got one on standby. So letting people speak is a big one.
Yeah, I guess it's a lot of, as you said, so divorce is such an emotional, we often say divorce is 95% emotional and 5% the rest, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot of emotion that comes into. Is there any other things such as with co-parenting, like is there any things like is structure help with regulation or with communication? We know one of the things I say is when we're really kind of in a overwhelmed state, that maybe routines can help. I don't know what your view is on that, like with your children, with yourself. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It does. And I think routines are great, especially coming from my background, like timings and regulations and routines and getting stuff done. That's a big part of my life. And I think it can really help kids as well. I know that when I have my sons with me, if we follow a set routine, they are far more adjusted, far more healthy, and I believe they're happier. But I'm biased, and I think that as long as you can communicate effectively with their other parent, your co-parent, about those routines, then you can stay on the same page. The challenge comes, I think, especially if you have a quick turnaround, because there's a couple different parenting regimes. Let's assume that you're 50-50. Some parents will have 2 days, 2 days, 3 days, right? So I would have them for 2, you would have them for 2, then I'd have them for 3. And then it kind of switches. That's a lot of back and forth. So if you've got 2 dramatically different routines in the households, that can really contribute to a lot of upheaval and unrest for the kids. So in those cases, communication is especially important.
What are some communication? I was thinking about communications because communication matters, right? So what are the things that I've heard too is they want to control still, where they say you don't do that, you can't do this, like especially with co-parenting. So is there better ways that they can talk, like maybe Mara, I'm more understanding of the situation, or flexibility with co-parenting instead of attacking and blaming the other co-parent? Or it's more like being more understanding and more flexible is what I guess I already said that.
Yeah, flexibility is key. And I think something that trips couples up in a relationship can be scorekeeping and really trying to lay blame and saying, well, you did this last week, so I'm going to do this week because you owe me, kind of thing. I would encourage folks that are attempting to co-parent really not to lay blame in that regard, particularly. So an accident happens at one of the houses, for instance, kid gets injured, let the other parent know. And the other parent that's hearing about this, don't use it as ammunition against them. Should something similar happen at your house or not at your house? If you can take the blame and the emotion out of a lot of that communication, then really you're halfway there. And you're focusing on the needs of the kids as opposed to kind of the emotional stigma that might be attached to any of that.
Do you think sometimes the best interest of the children gets lost in divorce?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the first things, unfortunately, out the window, because again, when you're in that fight or flight situation, it's very, very hard to think objectively about your own best interests. And I don't care how much you love your kids, if you can't think about your own best interests, how are you supposed to look after theirs? And when I'm talking best interests, I'm talking emotionally, self-care, responding in healthy ways, healthy habits. And how many times have we seen folks go to court just to lambaste their former partner or their co-parent just to let them have it? Really. Objectively, it makes sense that I had the kids last Christmas, so you should probably have the kids next Christmas. Or, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, we split it up like that. But then, even though that could be seen factually to be in the kid's best interest, and I'm not saying that every situation is cookie cutter, because it's not, but how are you supposed to move beyond that to a place that is actually, and I hate using the word, even though it's in my name, fair, right? Because really fairness is subjective. So you got to think objectively what's going to be best for the kids and park your emotions as quickly as possible, I would say.
I had a divorce coach on, I don't know, about 8 episodes before, and he talked about how he was so angry, though. Like, he was so angry, and he was going to the gym 3 times a day just to distract. And it's one of those things that it seems to me that it's such a common thing in divorce, that the emotions run so high. It's maybe a betrayal that happened, or someone just left and you're feeling so much grief, right? So is there any tools that you know of that would be good for when, even if you're not in mediation right then, but you're so angry at everything that's happened? Is there tools that you would suggest to them, or that you've used yourself in your situation, because you have been in some really difficult situations where it's maybe been unjust, right? Or you've been so angry. Is there anything that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in cases like that, as difficult as they may be, try to take a multi-pronged approach, if you like. So I would recommend therapy for sure. Whether that's talk therapy, EMDR, Flash, ART, whatever is going to help you get over that hump. Look after yourself physically, like going to the gym. Don't overdo it. And then practice mindfulness as well. So whether that's meditation, whether that's journaling, whether that's getting outside, I love to fish and hunt and camp. That always helps me stay grounded as well. And remember as well that, and your therapist will help you with this. And if you've got any psychologists or therapists listening, which I'm sure you do, I'll try not to butcher this too much, but anger isn't a real emotion, right? Really, it's a front for something that's lying underneath. So you talked about that betrayal, or maybe a relationship falling apart over a period of years. It's probably not just anger or rage, or I can say it certainly isn't. What is that underneath? Is it that feeling of not being good enough? Is it that imposter syndrome? Is it betrayal? Is it your pride? Is it your sense of self that was deeply rooted in this life that you had established and this future that you had in mind that is now no longer going to be the same?
Also, I would like to add that there's also Dr. Niemeyer is a famous grief therapist that I admire, and he said at the core, when you've been rejected, so say you were left, at the core of yourself is you don't feel lovable. So it's deeper than the anger. The anger is, like you said, it's kind of a way to get it out other ways, but the deepness of it is you don't feel love. You've been rejected. You, at the core, you don't feel loved, lovable. And so there's a lot of hurt with that comes along with anger. And that's kind of masking the anger. And then there's also, like, if you do research, there's also rational anger, right? Like, you do have a time where, like, say you were financially abused or you were cheated on. There is a component of you're allowed to be rational anger at moments. Sometimes it can be healthy. It's just there's better outlets to express that, right? Like, and there's a new study actually that came out to how to express your anger. Isn't so much going to the gym. It's more about playing sports or going for walks. But did you know that venting to venting, like if I call up a girlfriend and I'm really angry at my ex, and then she's like, oh, yeah, I'm really angry too. Like, it just kind of makes it even worse. Yeah. It's just new research that came out. I wrote a blog about it because it was fascinating, because everyone thinks, venting or going to the gym is really helpful. I think the gym is still somewhat helpful, but there is actual other ways that actually kind of help decompress the anger. I don't know if you've heard about that.
I think I've heard snippets of it for sure. And you got to be careful with the venting. I think it's okay to meet with people that you trust and that are going to help you rebuild and come back stronger, but be very cautious about the angle that you take kind of in that discussion and in that recovery as well, because I don't think it's helpful if you just pick and choose folks that are going to be an echo chamber for you and then throw all that rage and hate in there, and then you get it back and you get positive reinforcement that it's great to be feeling this way and it's totally justified and what a bastard or whatever. And that's not really helping you move to a more positive place, either for yourself or in this relationship that you might have to continue in one capacity or another. Whether it's co-parenting or it's sharing the parakeet or still being part of the same volunteer organizations, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, that's really, and this is why I love mediators, because even in the divorce world with lawyers, and I want to say there are some good lawyers, there's very family oriented lawyers, but there's some really bad lawyers. And it's been in our system so long where it's like we're fighting against each other. Right. And it's not, this is a family unit that's just changing. Right. But sometimes our society, as well as the lawyers, some lawyers have made it into more. This is adversarial. We need to fight for your rights. I know a mediator down in Florida, at least she was on the podcast too a while back. And she said there's billboards in Florida with, we will fight for to win. And it's family court. Like, this is, and she's like, that's not what we want. We want you to get you right. There's no, and as you said, it breeds, right? Anger, and anger, and that's a very, very costly way to go. Also, as well as what it does to the children.
Absolutely. And I do believe, and it's my company motto, but everybody can win. It depends on what you want that to look like, again, because it's so subjective. So that's why you really have to dig in to the underlying issues and try and find those nuggets of information, or it's like, okay, well, this is where this resentment or insecurity is coming from, or the anger.
Another common thing that comes up is not many, I don't know if you've seen this with your clients, but not many people really understand what it takes to get a divorce, like the actual process of how stressful it can be. I don't know if you've seen that, but that's what I've heard over and over and over again. And then when they're out of it, they're like, whoa, it was harder. They weren't prepared for what it actually was.
Karen, I honestly wish that, and I've said this to clients in consultation before, if I could take your psyche, your brain, your emotional responses from 3, 4, 5 years down the road and put them into your body, your frontal cortex, your amygdala right now, how would that look? Because I can tell you 5 years from now, you're going to feel very differently. And if you drag this through litigation for 2 or 3 years, that's going to take years off your life, literally. And you're going to be working until you're 100 years old to pay those legal bills. Really, I was going to say you're no further ahead. You're probably further behind.
I love that metaphor. That's a great metaphor that everybody should listen. It'll probably be on our clip because it is so important to understand. where you are at the beginning and then 5 years later, because it's so different in how, right? And it's so important. And I don't really think they understand the true cost. The cost isn't just, it's huge money, but it's also your children. I'm from a high conflict divorce. It's the children that take a lot.
And when you've got kids saying, I don't like being stuck in the middle, you can't get much of a much more clear indicator that they are definitely aware of what's going on. Like, they might be little, you might think they don't understand. They understand, they get it. But talking about the previous comment about how are you going to feel in 5 years about this, I think we can probably both be testament to that. Like, it's been a number of years since my own separation and divorce, and I feel completely different about it now. At the time, sure, it was all consuming, it was stressful, it was enraging at times, but you will move past that. So anyone listening, you will move past that. It gets better. I know you've heard it a million times, but it gets better. So do your future self a favor and just be mindful in how you approach the process, really. And that's not a shameless plug for mediation necessarily, because there are a lot of different processes that work for different people. But don't be too quick to kind of jump into the ring with a lawyer and just try to take him for everything, right? Because it doesn't really work out that way.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why maybe you got in the field as well as I did, is because I'm thinking 8 years ago, when I went through mine, I was a fish out of water. I had no idea. I just did what society told me to. Go to a lawyer.
100%. Yeah.
I didn't know about coaching. I didn't know about mediation. I didn't know there was certified financial advisors. I didn't know, and I think that's why there's a real movement, because these are families that are suffering from, the fallout of how the system's always been that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember a quote from an article that I read. It was an article written by a British fellow that had been through a particularly contentious divorce. And they were probably an upper middle class family, had some wealth, home, a couple of kids, and it all got torn apart. And the closing line, sort of in his conclusion, was that the divorce industry has become like vultures keen to feed on the carcass of what was once a stable, loving, successful family. And that was sad. That visual was sad to me. So I want people to remember that if you have to go through this, there's definitely a tool for every step of that journey. So I, as the mediator, I might be a tool that's going to help you out. There might be a tool that can help you out with part of that process, right? And then there might be a time that you need a lawyer, whether that's for some independent legal advice or they're actually drafting documents for you. It might be a coach. It might be a spiritual advisor. It might be a therapist. It might be a wellness retreat. Whatever that looks like, separation when you're going through it is not a one-size-fits-all process. It really, really isn't. So just be mindful of the different resources and educate yourself on who you can actually benefit from engaging with at certain points in that process.
Also, another thing I want to mention before we wrap up is that for mediation, is there you need to prepare yourself for that?
Usually there's some disclosure that has occurred already. When I'm talking with clients that are separating, I try to get them to narrow it down to a couple of issues. Because if you and I were going our separate ways, it might be that you start with this giant list of stuff. Well, we need to sort out parenting schedule, custody, child support, spousal support, division of the house, who's going to keep the boat, who's going to keep the cat. And it's sort of like, okay, so this is all stuff that we disagree on and we have a kind of a hard line on? And it turns out that 99% of the time, that's not the case, right? It's like, oh, no, we're good with the 50-50. And then during the summer, I'll take them to see my parents, for a couple of weeks here. Mom can take them during this time. And they've actually worked out 90% of the details already. So it's like, okay, what are the 3 or 4 biggest issues that we can focus in on and spend our time on? And it might not always be what you think.
I've heard that before, right? Like one will go in with this mindset and then the other one goes in and then it's really not what they had thought it was going to be at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like when you had those puzzles and you're trying to jam the pieces in that don't fit. So instead of taking the scalpel out or kind of raging on them and trying to hammer the pieces to make them fit, just reevaluate them and sort of say, okay, well, why isn't this piece jiving with this one? Okay, well, let's rotate them a little bit, and you can actually have what you want, and you can have what you want as well. They're different things. It's just folks are typically, as we touched on, done a very poor job of communicating what it is that they need.
So I want to ask you, so, you're a war vet and you're a police officer, which are very structured type of systems, correct? So, but mediation is it can be interesting sessions, right? It's not like it's what's the biggest thing that surprised you from being in that world of structure and hierarchy to being in mediation?
I think what actually surprised me the most is the assumption that that's a funny question. I like it. The assumption that structure and rules and straightforward approaches and one size fits all couldn't solve every problem. And I think you learn that both in the military and in policing. And that is that you're trained to respond in certain ways to certain situations. In policing, for instance, we'll say if, then. If the subject pulls out a knife, you pull out a gun. And there's a structure for that. But as you evolve in both those careers, you realize that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach for everything. And then once I started to sort of try things out with mediation and get more involved with that, I realized that as a result of these careers and all this experience that I'd had before, I'd really developed a lot of the skills that I used to call professional shortcuts, where instead of showing up, this has happened, I arrest this person, potentially have to fight with this person, take them to jail, and then spend 6 hours doing paperwork. If you spend half an hour to an hour talking to them and coming up with a better plan, or at least one that maybe you wouldn't have walked in with initially, you can find a way better resolution. And once I realized that there were a lot of parallels between police work particularly and mediation in that regard, I realized that really what I've been doing the whole time was mediating and rationalizing with folks and listening to what the underlying issues really were.
Yeah, that's a brilliant response, because I was thinking, that there is some overlap, right? A good police officer is going to talk, they're going to listen, they're going to figure it out, right? Like try to figure it out to the best of your abilities. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with mediation, right? Like that's kind of what you're doing, right?
You have to learn not to be a fixer, right? And I think those of us in relationships can kind of attest to that, right? You have a significant other, they come home, they have had a hell of a day. It's like, okay, do you want me to listen, or do you want me to offer advice on how to potentially correct this problem? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get just listen to my day. And you're like, that's fine. And you can sit back and do that. And now mediation and even, police work is a lot of that. If you go to somebody in distress, for instance, it would be very easy to escalate a situation. I went to a call, tell a cop story, where a man was just sitting on a park bench with a knife to his own arm, just sobbing. So would it have been easy to use force, less lethal options, to take him into custody? So you're injuring him potentially for his own good, so that you can then take him to hospital for the mental health treatment he needs. Or do you sit back and you actually just talk for 30, 45 minutes? Because chances are this person just wants to be heard, and they haven't been heard or listened to for a long time. And that's how they feel. And if you can master that art of listening and seeking first to understand before being understood, that is really at the core of mediation, listening, and clear communication in general.
Yeah, because I'm assuming that, some of these couples that you see, they haven't been really heard, right? So you're here to help them navigate that so they can get to a good agreement and move on. Because we as we talked about today, it is, look at us, we're posts and put our bodies back. If we could put our heads where we were back then, we'd be pretty cool as a cucumber, because we know so much more now. But before we wrap up,
we'd be cuter too. I'm a lot healthier as a result. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Like
Yeah.
emotionally healthier, physically healthier. Yeah, me
Mm-hmm.
too. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to say before we?
Yeah, you know what? Like, I would jump back. I can tell another story here. It's kind of funny. We were talking about how couples kind of lose sight of what's best for the kids and the co-parenting situations, especially when lawyers can get too involved. And I love you, lawyers. Don't take this the wrong way. There's definitely a place at the table for everybody. You are definitely a big tool in the toolbox. But I went to a domestic call where one parent was trying to have the other one breached because they had a no contact order in place. And so mom meets me in the van with the girls, a couple of kids, and she's refusing to take them back to dad's house. Well, he breached his no contact order. I said, okay, what's the order? Well, he can't contact me directly or through a third party, and I want an emergency protection order as a result. And on a side note, there was no emergency, really. So emergency protection orders are, typically for domestic violence. Someone needs access to safety and resources right away as a result of a specific incident. And so she's saying, well, my lawyer told me to call if he contacted me and get an emergency protection order. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about that. What were these communications like? Well, he contacted me, he texted me, and he wasn't supposed to. I said, okay, can I see the message? Phone. And it was, hey, Karen, sorry to bug you. I'm just hoping you can remind me what time to pick the girls up from ballet. And I was like, okay, so let's look at this for a minute. We want to go through the court, add another contentious issue to your plate in front of your kids, and then restrict parenting access. So we were talking about kind of staying objective and what's actually going to be best for the kids or best for the overall process. So spoiler alert, ultimately I said, no, I'm not willing to breach dad for this, when really the spirit of the conversation was not about manipulating you or abusing you in any way, but more about how to provide better service or better be a parent to those kids. So don't lose sight of that, because that's easy to lose sight of, but don't weaponize the kids. Don't weaponize the court system, lawyers. Play nice.
And it's common though, Justin, because
all too common. Yeah.
All too common, because I've heard it and I lived it, right, as a child of divorce as well. And that's where when we talked about earlier was best interest of the child, right? And in some situations like what you described, that wasn't in the best interest of the children at all, because there was no threat to saying, hey, what time I have to pick up the kids for dance,
Like, isn't that good for the kids to have their dad there waiting for them? Take them for a blizzard or whatever and have a good evening. Like, I'm going to flip roles here a little bit, Karen, and I'm just going to ask. So when you were growing up in a separated family, at what point were you really aware of the dynamic that was kind of going on between the parents? And I'm springing this on you. For listeners, she was not expecting this, so we don't have to get too deep into it. But
No, it's fine. 6 months, my parents divorced. I was 6 months old.
Okay.
And I saw my dad every other weekend. But things probably 5 or 6 years old, I started noticing.
Like, that's early.
Yeah, but I can remember things were happening. My sister had to go to the voice of the child in front of the judge type of thing. And I mean, my parents fought over pictures, right? Like, and it was more my dad being the high conflict parent, high conflict type of personality. So the grief and the anxiety as a child I felt. And when you were telling me that story about the call you got recently, I'm just thinking about what they put their children through, because that wasn't necessary to get your kids all nervous system, all hyped up about a call about what time's dance class. So it's really important. And that's a big can of worms we can open up there with mental health, mental illness, and I'm going to tell everybody that this type of divorce, these high conflict divorces, do affect the children 100%. And that's why a lot of advice is, if you're the stable parent, you maintain stability and you don't get caught up in their tactics, or it's really hard.
Well, they
I'm
try.
not. Well, they do, and they will continue to try. They will
Mm-hmm.
continue to try, Justin, because they don't stop. It's part of their abuse patterns, right? Like, they use Darvo, and they use fog, and fog is fear, obligation, or guilt. They'll use that. They'll throw out those three, the acronym, stuff like that. So you do have to be really mindful of that. But I do really want, even for people that are in high conflict, you can, from everyone I've talked to with mediators and lawyers, is you can start with mediation. For sure. You can try to start, even get something done. You're right. It would be better than trying to do it all in the court, because the court systems are a mess in the US and Canada, I think. And it's not an easy journey, but it is the better way to at least start that way. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I totally agree, even in cases of high conflict, and I'm very comfortable handling high conflict. However, it could be that they've said, we're not going to settle this outside a courtroom. That's fine. Couple of things, particularly here in Alberta, you have to go through some kind of mediation or alternative dispute resolution process in order to file any applications before the court. And if you're going to engage the services of a lawyer and all their expertise, it's a lot easier to have a write-up summary from a mediator. And I'll provide two letters, one to the court that has no details on it, saying, yeah, they attended and talked about these issues without the specifics. And then one with all the specifics that can't be disclosed. That's without prejudice. And they could then take that to the lawyer and say, we can agree on X, Y, and Z. So instead of the lawyer then having to charge or go through the process of saying, potentially with another lawyer, okay, what are we looking at kind of dealing with here? And having to have a whole bunch of communication and everything go back and forth, questioning, cross-examination, discovery, whatever that looks like, they have a starting point. So you and I, we're splitting up. We go to a mediator, and like I described earlier, 90% you're agreeing on. Okay, so that leaves us just 10% that we've got to litigate. Perfect.
it makes it faster, maybe a bit easier, less stressful.
10%
right?
stress, 10% money. That's what you're left with.
Perfect. So before you tell me all about where they can get in touch with you, I ask all our guests this question. For someone who's just separated, whether they were left, what advice would you give them to help them navigate those overwhelming early days?
That's a good question. From my perspective and from my experience, I would say take your time. Time is a gift. Life is a gift. Use as much of it as you can so that you can respond from a place of clarity and calmness versus reacting. Because whether it's 24 hours down the road or 5 years down the road, you are going to respond a lot more differently than if you do in that moment when you're in that fight or flight.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think that's kind of the gist of this podcast today with you, is to remember who you're going to be in 5 years isn't who you are right now. And that if you think of how you and I are talking now, you will get through this. It's really hard, even if you're the one that left. It's a hard journey, period, right? Because you are changing the foundational core of a family unit. But there's a lot of grief there. There's a lot of pain sometimes, and life will change, but we both know it'll get better. So yeah, I love that. So Justin, where can they get in touch with you to consult with you? And are you able to consult worldwide, or is it just Alberta?
I can definitely consult worldwide. I just won't have as much knowledge potentially about, even though I can't give advice being a non-lawyer, I won't understand the processes that may be involved in the legal systems, depending on where you're kind of contacting me from. Alberta, I definitely know the most. Canada-wide would be second. And then the rest of the world, really, I can help resolve issues. I mean, humans are the same wherever you go. And I have mediated with some folks that are abroad, North Africa, Bangladesh.
There's a common theme that's come up in the years I've been in this business too, is except for the legal little changes within countries or states or provinces, or, I mean, there are differences depending on the world, but divorce is divorce is divorce. Like, it is all of, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I've heard from others, and I say it myself. It's like, it may be different in the Philippines, which doesn't have a divorce, I don't think.
It's weird there. That's a whole other podcast. Yeah.
We had a client consultation. It was like, you really aren't even able to divorce there, I don't think. So, but divorce is still divorce, right? So, and do you want to mention your website where they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is divorcemediationcalgary.ca. And FairPlay Mediation is also on Instagram, Facebook, and it's got all my email and my phone number on there. So I'm always available to answer questions or free consultations for anybody that might be considering mediation as a route. Even if we're not the right fit for each other, you're looking for somebody maybe a little bit more formal, a little bit more structured, because I'm fairly casual. That's fine too. I don't mind pointing you in the right direction or helping you out where I can.
Yeah, I loved having you on because, as I said to you before, your background and what you do now can really be helpful for people in mediation, because you have a lot of different skill sets that a lot of mediators don't have. So I really think that you understand people really well, and you've had to deal with a lot of people really differently than most of us have had to. So great work. Thank you for coming on, and take care. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you for joining today's discussion with our divorce expert. Check out the show notes for more about our guest. If you're finding value in our podcast, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our YouTube channel at Divorce Workshop. Share your questions, comments, or guest suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. For a comprehensive divorce guide, check out our Just Separated workbook on Amazon worldwide. This workbook covers everything from emotions and co-parenting to finances, legal insights, and recovery. A must-have for anyone navigating separation or divorce.